He sat perfectly still, chest rising and falling in even, deliberate rhythm, when the silence abruptly thickened with tension. A stranger from another school of martial arts stepped closer, not to exchange words, but to issue a quiet, unmistakable challenge. Witnesses later recalled the statement as calm, controlled, yet it landed like a spark in the room, sharp and undeniable. Every eye locked on him. Every breath became heavier, as if the air itself anticipated a single misstep that could shatter reputation or forge a legend. In those moments, no one moved, yet everyone knew that what happened next would define not just skill, but the measure of courage, control, and principle. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The room was quiet, almost unnaturally so, the kind of silence that presses lightly against the skin. In a small, sparsely furnished space somewhere in the early 1970s, Bruce Lee sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, eyes closed, chest rising and falling with steady, deliberate rhythm. The faint rustle of his loose tunic brushed against the floor with each slight shift, a whisper in the otherwise hushed room. Around him, a handful of witnesses from different martial arts traditions observed from a respectful distance, their postures cautious, hands folded or resting lightly at their sides. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and the lingering trace of incense, subtle but grounding, carrying a calm that seemed almost physical. Then, a new presence entered. The door moved without a creak, but the sound of carefully measured footsteps on the floor drew attention. The man who entered wore traditional attire, the fabric heavy but flowing, his movements precise, as though each step was a conscious statement of discipline. He paused at the threshold, just long enough for his presence to be registered fully. In those seconds, the tension became tangible. The visitors shifted, some barely perceptible, others taking a cautious step back. A metallic jingle, small and quick, perhaps a clasp or part of a scabbard, cut through the silence. According to those who were there, the man's voice was measured and even, almost detached. He issued a challenge, brief and devoid of inflection, like a statement of fact rather than emotion. The sound seemed to linger in the space, bouncing off walls, reaching ears and nerves alike. Bruce did not open his eyes immediately. He remained still, a grounded presence, his chest rising and falling, fingers relaxed, shoulders unmoving. The pause was almost cruel in its simplicity. A few of the witnesses swallowed hard, the sharp intake of breath amplified in the quiet. Air seemed heavier, thicker, as if the room itself were waiting for a decision. No one moved. Even the smallest motions, the subtle brush of a sleeve across the floor, a faint scrape of fabric against skin, were magnified. Bruce's silence was not hesitation, but intention. He did not flinch, did not show annoyance or fear. The guest's gaze lingered on him, assessing, testing, yet Bruce's stillness conveyed something beyond the immediate challenge, a presence that was unshakable, aware, and deliberate. Every subtle sound, the soft friction of clothing, the almost inaudible adjustment of a weight, the quick swallow of a nervous onlooker, felt like small detonations in the room's concentrated tension. Those present sensed the moment's fragility. The seconds stretched, each one loaded with expectation. Bruce's shoulders remained relaxed, yet his body hinted at readiness. It was a poised calm, not passivity. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, every breath of the witnesses synchronized in collective suspense. That brief, almost imperceptible lapse of reaction, the calm in the eye of a storm, made the challenge sharper, more defined. In that silence, everyone understood that the forthcoming interaction would define more than skill or strength. It would reveal principle, patience, and the measure of control. And so, the moment held, poised on the edge of possibility. The guest's presence and the hushed anticipation of the room created a tension that was almost tactile. Each second of inaction deepened the focus. Bruce's stillness was magnetic, drawing every eye, every thought into the space between what had been said and what would inevitably happen next. It was in this quiet, pregnant with expectation, that everyone realized those next moments would not just be about a challenge, but about observing the measure of a master. It was precisely this suspension, the seconds of unbroken calm before a response, that made all eyes lock on the figure across from them, the man who had entered, and the unspoken question lingered. What would he do next? The tension thickened as the guest shifted forward, closing the gap by a measured step. The movement was deliberate, not hasty, yet it carried weight, a clear signal that this was more than a formal greeting. The room seemed to contract with the gesture, every witness aware that this was a test, not a demonstration. No names were exchanged, no formalities offered. Observers quietly registered that this was not about display or ego. It was about principle, a silent evaluation of readiness, poise, and awareness. Bruce's eyes opened slowly, as if seeing the world anew, yet his body remained grounded, unbroken by the slight encroachment. His gaze did not drift to the man's hands, nor did it dart to the edges of the room where others had taken subtle steps back. Instead, it anchored on the visitor's eyes, steady, unflinching, and calm. In that look was no challenge, no threat, only attention. He adjusted his hands, a subtle repositioning, almost imperceptible, signaling awareness and balance. Every micro-motion seemed magnified by the silence. Someone in the back shifted nervously, realizing an instinctive intervention would be both inappropriate and futile. The pause stretched on, a quiet dialogue without words. It was in this stillness that the contrast became clear. Bruce's calm defied the expectation of reaction. His restraint was deliberate, demonstrating that control and clarity could carry more force than speed or aggression. Meanwhile, the guest's minimal forward lean and slight tightening of shoulders betrayed his intent to probe and measure, yet he had not yet committed to motion. The witnesses felt the oscillation of tension, a subtle ebb and flow as the two men sized each other. Every shallow breath, every barely audible shift of fabric, created layers of suspense. Bruce did not speak. His silence was more than absence of words. It was a presence, an unspoken assertion of principle. It suggested that strength could exist without immediate action, that mastery involved waiting for the exact moment rather than seizing it prematurely. The distance between them now seemed minimal, charged with meaning, yet still unbroken by violence. Observers noted a change in the guest's posture, a micro-adjustment of weight, a tiny shift of one foot, that indicated awareness of Bruce's unyielding calm. It became clear. This encounter was about more than personal skill. It was a conversation about approach, philosophy, and measured response. The subtle creak of the floor under the guest's step and the faint rustle of his robe resonated like a pulse in the hushed space. Bruce's exhalation, soft but intentional, carried weight, a signal that he had registered the challenge yet chose patience over confrontation. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation, each breath of the witnesses echoing in the heightened quiet. Every eye was drawn to the minimal movements, the slight pivot of a shoulder, the fraction of an inch lean of the torso, the deliberate alignment of hands. It was at this moment that the nature of the encounter became unmistakable. What hung in balance was not mere physical prowess, but a principle of restraint, the choice to observe and measure rather than strike. Bruce's composure suggested that the next step could either be a respectful acknowledgement or a leap into conflict, with consequences irreversible once taken. The room, suspended in this narrow space between motion and stillness, held its collective breath, attuned to the smallest shift. As the gap between the two men reached its closest, the tension reached a physical pulse. Every subtle cue, eye contact, hand placement, micro-lean, hinted at the imminent possibility. One gesture, one decision, could transform the quiet evaluation into an irreversible sequence of action. Observers instinctively leaned forward in their awareness, sensing that the next motion, whether slight or forceful, would define the boundary between respect and confrontation. In that space, electric and compressed, the unspoken understanding was unanimous. The forthcoming choice would reveal not just skill, but principle, intent, and discernment. Bruce rose with deliberate slowness, each movement controlled, measured, and unhurried. The subtle sound of fabric brushing against the wooden floor marked the shift, almost inaudible, but amplified by the thick silence around him. His posture straightened, shoulders aligned, spine erect. Yet there was no rigidity, only poised readiness. Observers noted how his expression remained calm, unmarked by anticipation or irritation. He did not glance at the guest's hands, nor follow the shifting weight of his feet. Instead, his eyes locked onto the visitor's gaze, absorbing, weighing, observing. A few seconds stretched longer than they should have, each heartbeat filling the room with almost physical pressure. The guest stiffened, shoulders tightening, a subtle cue of readiness. He had likely intended to provoke a reaction, to test reflexes. But Bruce's composed assent undermined that purpose. Bruce shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, a minor adjustment that signaled balance, presence, and the readiness to respond without haste. Around them, witnesses remained motionless, attuned to every detail. The creak of a board beneath Bruce's sole, the faint inhale of air through tense lips, even the minor sway of someone's sleeve became magnified in the shared concentration. Each fraction of movement carried significance. Bruce's rise was neither challenge nor retreat. It was preparation, a measured response to the situation rather than an immediate counter. The guest's own micro-adjustments betrayed awareness that his intentions had been read. The room seemed to compress, the walls drawing closer with the intensity of collective focus. The faint resonance of a foot shifting, a whisper of clothing against skin, became a dialogue of intention, a conversation without words, but charged with meaning. Observers understood instinctively. What had been a simple challenge had evolved into a delicate negotiation of timing, control, and principle. Bruce's eyes remained locked on the visitor, unwavering, not in aggression, but in calculated attentiveness. There was no threat in his gaze, no provocation, yet the clarity of his awareness was undeniable. Witnesses reported feeling the weight of his presence, a magnetic stillness that anchored the space, imposing order on the tension without force. A subtle shift of his torso, a minor repositioning of the feet, carried volumes, readiness without escalation, acknowledgement without confrontation. The guest's tiny, almost imperceptible lean revealed that he had recognized the equilibrium, and that the next instant would test their respective choices. The air itself seemed charged, thick with anticipation. Every inhalation of those present resonated in the quiet, every nervous twitch amplified by the absolute stillness. A distant creak, the almost inaudible friction of a hand against the floor, and the slow rise and fall of Bruce's chest became markers of time suspended. It was in these micro moments that the real drama unfolded. Each participant, whether active or passive, was drawn into a tension that measured more than reflex. It measured principle, patience, and perception. Observers noted that Bruce's composure suggested complete control over not just the immediate moment, but the trajectory of what might follow. He did not anticipate attack merely to react. He anticipated intention, holding back force until it became necessary. The guest, whose steps had been measured and deliberate, now stood equally aware that the window for preemptive action was closing. Both men were locked in a silent calculus of movement, balance, and understanding, the slightest gesture carrying irreversible consequence. In the tense stillness, it became clear to everyone that the next second would be critical. Bruce's poised ascent, the minute shifts of his weight, and the unbroken focus of his eyes conveyed a simple truth. The unfolding events were no longer about words or display. They were about timing, precision, and the measured choice that would define what followed. Beyond skill or speed, it was a demonstration of mastery over self and circumstance. All present understood that from this point onward, the pace would accelerate, decisions would become irreversible, and the principles of restraint and awareness would be tested in real time. The space between them narrowed to the point where personal boundaries felt tangible. Every witness could sense the shift, a subtle contraction in the room, as if the air itself had thickened around the two figures. The guest adjusted his stance with a deliberate, almost imperceptible movement, no longer ceremonial but practical, a readiness that signaled the balance was about to tip. Bruce's gaze registered the change instantly, calm and precise, yet he remained motionless beyond the slightest lean of his torso, a measured acknowledgement rather than reaction. The few onlookers instinctively stepped back toward the walls, the pressure of the room's intensity pressing against them. Their breaths were shallow, each inhalation synchronizing with the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath shifting feet. The guest's micro-adjustments, the subtle tightening of a shoulder, the nuanced shift of weight from one foot to another, betrayed the fact that he was probing, testing, and preparing. Bruce mirrored none of the haste, but a minimal shift of his own center of gravity conveyed readiness and awareness, a silent counterbalance to the visitor's maneuvers. The air vibrated with anticipation. Each subtle motion was magnified by the charged stillness. Observers reported that for a moment, time itself seemed suspended. Even the small friction of fabric against skin, the faint squeak of soles on the worn boards, became a language of intention. Bruce and the guest were reading one another in silence, each motion a word, each pause a sentence. It was a conversation conducted in micro-expressions, shifts of weight, and precise, controlled gestures. The guest tested once more with a nearly invisible step forward, gauging reaction, yet Bruce responded only with the smallest adjustment of posture, a deliberate signal that he was fully aware without provocation. The tension was no longer abstract. It pressed physically on the witnesses. One could almost feel the beat of their own hearts as it resonated with the near-imperceptible rhythm of the two men's movements. Bruce's eyes remained fixed, unblinking, yet calm, giving nothing away. Neither challenge nor fear, only presence. The guest's next micro-motion, a fraction of an inch shift of the hip, was read instantly, recognized, and balanced without overt action. It was a dialogue without sound, yet complete and precise. Every tiny cue mattered. A shoulder lift, a subtle turn of the wrist, a breath held, a toe pivot. A faint, resonant sound of the wooden floorboard under the guest's weight echoed like a drumbeat, unnerving in its clarity. The creak amplified the tension, The slow tightening of his fingers was mirrored by the absolute stillness of Bruce's hands, controlled, relaxed, and prepared. Observers felt the moment's weight keenly, the delicate balance of restraint and readiness, the calculus of action and counteraction compressed into fractions of movement. The silent interplay had reached the precipice where hesitation could no longer exist. It became unmistakable. The forthcoming instant would decide whether this encounter remained a controlled test or escalated into conflict. The micro-adjustments, the subtle shifts of gravity, the unbroken focus in Bruce's eyes, all combined to communicate that the outcome hinged not on strength alone, but on timing and discernment. In that compressed space, with tension palpable and every small motion laden with consequence, the next moment was poised to reveal whether principle would hold or force would intervene. Every onlooker felt the imminence. The following second would determine the line between trial and engagement, observation and action. Time seemed to slow. Each heartbeat stretched into a tangible drum in the silent room. Every witness held their breath, aware that the balance between restraint and action was about to be tested. The guest shifted his weight forward, a subtle lean that betrayed intent, a signal that the moment of engagement had arrived. It was almost imperceptible, yet those watching recognized the gravity, the first trace of movement that could not be ignored. Bruce's response was not to the motion itself, but to the underlying purpose behind it. His eyes remained fixed, unblinking, tracking the guest's posture, his breathing, the alignment of weight, and the faint tension in muscles. He took a single, measured step, short and precise, a movement that adjusted trajectory rather than initiated force. The sound of his foot sliding over the worn wooden floor was muted, yet resonant, a subtle declaration of presence. Around them, the room seemed to hold its collective pulse, every small friction of fabric, every barely audible inhale amplified in the heightened attention. The trajectories of both men became evident in those fractions of a second. Observers could almost feel the invisible lines of potential motion, the alignment of limbs, the calculated angles, the intent behind the minimal gestures. Bruce's single step shifted the balance, not through aggression, but through timing, exploiting the precise instant where intent and opportunity intersected. The guest's eyes widened fractionally, a micro-expression of realization that the initiative was no longer in his hands. Every witness sensed the sudden, almost imperceptible shift in power. Not through speed, not through strength, but through anticipation and mastery of the moment. The room was so silent that the smallest sound carried significance. A faint rustle of a sleeve, the subtle creak of a board under shifting weight, the tensioned inhale of a bystander. The guest's fingers curled slightly, knuckles whitening as he registered the shift, while Bruce remained controlled, breathing steady, body perfectly aligned. Observers remarked later on the absolute calm of his expression, the way it contrasted with the invisible tension radiating from the visitor's poised readiness. Time, compressed to these instant-long pulses, revealed the artistry of control. Even the subtlest micro-movements became consequential. Bruce's adjustment was enough to redirect potential contact without escalation, to anticipate rather than react. The guest's lean forward became both an invitation and a test, yet Bruce's precise positioning rendered the opening harmless, demonstrating the subtle power of timing. Witnesses felt the tension press in their chests, the silent expectation that the following second would crystallize the outcome of all preceding restraint and calculation. In that space, the drama of anticipation unfolded fully. Each micro-gesture, each shift of weight, carried the weight of possible consequence. Bruce's calm anticipation, the fractional advance, the micro-adjustments of his center of gravity, all signaled that the forthcoming moment was imminent and decisive. The guest's own body language betrayed awareness of lost initiative, yet he had no room to act without consequence. It was clear to everyone watching. In less than a heartbeat, the scene would resolve. A single action determining control, intent, and principle. Bruce's step had set the stage, and all present understood the gravity of the approaching instant. The next movement, almost imperceptible in its brevity, would reveal mastery, timing, and the precise application of restraint. Every nerve in the room recognized that the critical second was upon them, and the unfolding moment would be decisive, unrepeatable, and utterly defining. The movement unfolded suddenly, yet with a fluid inevitability, like a single note struck at the perfect moment. Observers later described it as instantaneous, yet measured, a precise articulation of intent and control. Bruce's body acted with a clarity born of complete awareness. There was no flurry of strikes, no display of rapid succession, only one deliberate, exact action, executed with the timing that rendered it unstoppable without relying on brute force. The guest's forward lean, which moments ago signaled potential attack, became his undoing. In a fraction of a second, balance shifted, subtly but irreversibly. Contact occurred, not violent, not indiscriminate, but precise, controlled. The sound was brief, almost a sharp tap, the resonance of alignment rather than impact. Witnesses recalled a collective inhalation, simultaneous and involuntary, as the controlled motion revealed the weight of timing over power. Bruce did not continue the action. He stopped, posture unbroken, expression calm. There was no follow-through, because none was needed. The guest found himself off balance before he could complete the movement he had intended. It was as if the momentum of intention had been intercepted, redirected, neutralized, without harm. The room held the moment in suspension. The slight adjustment of weight, the minor displacement of stance, and the subtle, controlled placement of Bruce's hands were enough to render further movement impossible. Observers felt the tension relax slightly, even as their eyes remained locked on the figures, processing the efficiency and restraint of what had just occurred. Bruce's breath remained steady, measured, utterly unaffected by the speed and precision of the encounter. The guest's reaction was immediate, instinctive. He registered the misalignment, the loss of leverage, but there was no panic, only a quiet acknowledgement of the intervention. Every micro-detail mattered. The flex of a knee, the subtle adjustment of the shoulder, the exact point of contact. The precision, the economy of motion, was a study in mastery. Witnesses noted that the duration of the action, from initiation to resolution, lasted only seconds, yet it contained the weight of everything that had preceded it. The air, which had been thick with anticipation, seemed to pulse briefly, and then settle into a muted stillness. Even in the aftermath, the echoes of small sounds, the faint friction of cloth, the soft tap of feet regaining position, the restrained exhalation of the guest, resonated as part of the shared experience. The control exhibited by Bruce transformed the energy of confrontation into demonstration, principle manifest in action rather than conflict. Observers later described a sensation of awe, tempered by calm. The decisive moment had been determined not by aggression or speed, but by awareness, timing, and the deliberate choice to stop at the exact instant necessary. Bruce's restraint made the movement both effective and humane. There was no humiliation, no excess, only the assertion of skill and judgment. The guest remained momentarily immobile, recognizing the inevitable outcome, the impossibility of continuing the engagement without consequence. It became evident to everyone present. The defining factor had been the singular choice of when to act, and equally, when to cease. The highest stakes, physical danger, principle, and mastery, had been confronted and resolved in that instant. The room absorbed the stillness that followed, a collective exhalation that acknowledged the precision, the control, and the unmistakable presence of a master who had demonstrated that timing, perception, and restraint could carry authority far beyond brute force. The moment was over, yet its weight lingered, felt in the chest, the ears, and the mind of every witness, an indelible imprint of principle enacted perfectly. Bruce immediately released his hold, stepping back a measured pace, the motion deliberate and devoid of triumph. His posture remained relaxed, shoulders lowering slightly, eyes calm but attentive, showing no desire for dominance, no trace of condescension. The guest, still adjusting his balance, shifted slowly, regaining composure in careful increments. Each movement was deliberate, cautious, as if acknowledging both the outcome and the lesson implicit in the encounter. The room's tension, once taut and almost unbearable, began to dissipate in small, tangible waves. Observers noted that there was no applause, no verbal acknowledgement beyond the almost imperceptible exchange of respect. A faint exhale, shared collectively, seemed to release the compressed energy that had held the space captive. Bruce's gaze softened fractionally, a subtle signal that the confrontation was complete. The guest's posture, still attentive but no longer defensive, conveyed a quiet recognition. The test had concluded, the principle demonstrated, and the balance restored. Silence reasserted itself, but it was now lighter, almost infused with relief, the kind that follows a moment in which danger and principle intersect and resolve without harm. Every detail resonated, the gentle rustle of fabric as Bruce's step concluded, the slight shift of weight as the guest recovered, and the measured breathing of all present, all amplified by the earlier intensity. Witnesses later recounted noticing the minute gestures of acknowledgement between the two men. A tilt of the head, the soft realignment of a foot, a small, almost subconscious relaxation of the hands. These micro-actions carried the gravitas of respect, the clarity of understanding, and the quiet confirmation that no humiliation had occurred, only a demonstration of control exercised to its fullest measure. The moment became less about skill in the conventional sense and more about the lesson inherent in restraint. Bruce's choice to act, and just as importantly, to stop, revealed that mastery was not in dominating another body, but in mastering timing, perception, and principle. The guest's own awareness of this fact seemed to settle within him, evidenced by the gradual unwinding of tension from his shoulders and the subtle softening of his eyes. The room, once electrified with anticipation, now hummed with a quiet reverence, each person absorbing the full weight of what had transpired without need for commentary or reaction. Even small sensory cues carried significance. The soft echo of a foot against polished wood, the muted scrape of cloth as someone shifted slightly, the long, controlled exhalation that punctuated the pause. These details, mundane under normal circumstances, became markers of resolution, reminders of the equilibrium restored. Bruce's eyes scanned the room briefly, not seeking acknowledgement, but registering the presence and comprehension of all who had witnessed the event. The unspoken understanding was mutual. What had occurred was both singular and instructive, a moment of principle enacted with precision. In the stillness that followed, observers recognized that they had seen more than technique or speed. They had witnessed judgment, awareness, and restraint translated into physical expression. Bruce did not linger in any triumphant stance. He did not impose himself further. Instead, he allowed the natural conclusion to settle, the weight of authority conveyed simply by measured presence and control. The guest, now fully regaining balance, offered a minimal gesture, a slight nod, a tacit acknowledgement of the demonstration and of the respect inherent in its execution. That final second, the quiet aftermath, became the most powerful. The tension had resolved, the lesson clear, and the balance of respect maintained. Those present later reflected that it was not the speed of Bruce's action, nor the precision alone, but the combination of timing, restraint, and ethical judgment that had created the lasting impression. The encounter ended not in victory or defeat, but in a shared comprehension of principle, leaving the room transformed. Every observer felt it. The demonstration had transcended technique, conveying a standard of mastery, awareness, and human dignity that would linger in memory far longer than the brief, decisive instant itself.